everything situated on social media, get the Facebook stuff out there and all that. So give me just a couple seconds here to do that.
JT, what year were you born in?
1973.
Wow. Chris was born in 72.
I am 50 this year.
Boom.
It's beautiful. 50's beautiful.
Let's go. I'm all for it, man.
Today in honor of children of the 70s, I parted my hair down the middle and fluffed it up in the front. I don't know if you noticed that. You see it? Did you notice that?
You got a little
I don't know where I have a little poof going on. It doesn't. There we go. There we go. Look, it looks like that's my 7th grade school yearbook picture.
Yeah.
Chris needs to show you the picture. Do you have a picture of that, Chris? I think that might have been my 5th or 6th grade, maybe my 6th grade picture.
The perm? The perm?
Bro.
It's funny you mentioned that. I just saw that yesterday. I've got it. I've got it somewhere.
No way.
Yeah, I really do.
You need to send that out. That's something worth. I mean, that's worth the price of admission. And the crazy thing about it is, it was it started as. Do you remember, Jimmy, the perm mullet? Do you remember the perm mullet? Huh?
Yes.
In the back and the perm mullet. Well, that was the deal. But my perm came out a little bit more fluffy. It was more fluffy than permy. And so instead of having a nice ringlets or whatever, I just kind of had a little bit of a bloop back here. But I spent so much money on it. My mom wouldn't let me cut my hair. She wouldn't let me cut my hair. I mowed lawns and stuff. And she said, no, you paid too much money for that. And I had to get my school pictures with it. So I just rocked it.
Yeah.
Hey, do you remember back in the day? See, I'd have, like when I was in high school, the big deal was just the perm in the back. Like the top was normal, but the perm was in the back.
Yes.
The curls in the back. That was quite a look.
This is what this started out
What
to be.
turned out being.
No, that it was only a perm in the back.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah. But what happened was Mom, she took out the brush and the hairspray and tried to make it match. So that was my natural hair up here. But she teased it a little bit.
You look like
trans.
You look.
I looked like I was transitioning. There's just no question. There's no two ways about it.
You look like a catcher for some like the Milwaukee Brewers from 1978 or something.
It's very true. That's what turned me in.
Transitioning was cool.
I'm serious. Well, and the thing about it was, it was that was the day. That was the day when David Stevenson. Remember David Stevenson?
Yeah. Yeah.
You remember him? That was the day David Stevenson said. He said, "What'd you do with your hair?" I said, "Well, I said, I kind of liked your hair, and I was trying to do that." And he said, "You just look like a sissy." And I kicked him in the nuts and said, "Oh God, we're on." I said, "How about that for a sissy?"
We're gonna have to edit this part
out. Well, it edits. I won't be the worst that said today. So this is all. The bar is up here.
3, 2, 1.
I was gonna say you. That's why you had to be such a fighter, because you had that hairdo, man. Holy!
That's what I'm saying. It makes you tough. It makes you tough.
Hoo-wee. Wow.
You know what happened was, I chose a word that I thought was going to be better than crotch, and there was no word. I should have said I just kicked him.
Yeah, kicked him.
In the midsection.
There you go.
In the midsection. I always love that on basketball where they get hit and they're like, he got hit in the midsection.
It's like,
thank you.
My belly button is part of my midsection, bro. That's not a problem.
Thank you for that analysis.
Anyway, for those of you that are already tuned in live, my prayer life is good. God's been really moving in my life lately. I just want you to know that. But if you would like to pray for me, I could use the prayer.
I bring it out of people. It's really my fault.
That's your spiritual gift.
Special anointing.
It's a spiritual gift. Woo. Well, on that note, You guys ready to get rocking and rolling today?
Yes.
Jimmy's like, get me out of here.
I'll just be a silent observer today. Y'all have a great conversation.
No. It's gonna be awesome. All right. We're gonna do the 3, 2, 1, and then we'll get rolling. Scott Alton tuned in. Right? I don't think I can edit that out. Oh my word.
of all the time. Well.
Oh my goodness. Sorry, I gotta collect myself for a second.
Needed sound effects there.
Oh my God.
Oh my goodness. I don't think we've had a moment like I don't think you've said something like that since we've been
That's
on.
the first time. Oh.
Hooey. Okay.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, now you know why we're in the top 10% of podcasts in the world.
Oh my goodness gracious! Wow, you got me, bro. You got me on that one. Okay. All right. Here we go. We're gonna go. People are wondering what they missed. Nothing. You missed nothing. Nothing. Not a thing.
I think it's the Gainesville anointing.
That's what it is.
That might be, dude. That is probably it.
I just figured that out. I'm actually in Bishop's old office.
That's it.
It's a residual.
It's the weirdest deal.
That is what's happening right now.
It actually is the perfect Freudian slip, though, because I mean, you're thinking of the word you don't want to say,
and you say
something worse.
JW Arnold would be so proud right now.
Well, he would be like, "What's the big deal?" What's the big deal?
There's a lot of worse things you could call him.
Let's go.
Oh my goodness. All right, let's do it. Let's get going. Here we go.
Let's do it.
Whew.
Bo, people are like, doggone it. The more we talk about it, the more people are going to go back to the first of them.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tony Richard. Thank you, Bo. Thank you. For those of you that thank you. That's what I'm talking about.
It'll be the most watched 5 minutes on Facebook today.
Nothing else we say will even matter.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
You want to know? I'll be on some IFB. I'll be on some IFB. You want to know what's
Church
wrong?
Of laughs.
He say, you want to know what's wrong with the church today? This is what pastoring church is.
Awkward sermons you can't unhear.
That's right. That's right. Oh man. All right, we're really going to try to get going this time. All right.
Stop, guys. For real. We're if y'all keep commenting, we will not.
It will be over.
Lord. How are we going to do it?
You've unleashed the beast.
We might just need to turn it off, reassign.
Reassign.
Well, when he said that, I was thinking, are we live right
now? He said, hey, what's funny is because the precursor to it was the transitioning. He said we might need to reassign. Man. Golly, do I have a Kleenex or something?
Yeah, if I turn my camera off here in just a minute, you'll know what's going on. Like I had to recompose myself here.
Woo. Bad thing about it is these kinds of things we've learned you just got to get them out, because if not, 5 minutes later you'll think about it again and just start snickering.
Oh man, see, you didn't know you were coming on a high class podcast, did you, Jimmy? All right, let's do it. Here we go. All right. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mobilized Church Podcast. This is Chris Dillingham alongside my big brother, Ken Dillingham Jr. the third. We've already had a lively morning, and if this is any indication, this is going to be one of the greatest podcasts in the history of the world.
It has all of the ingredients for that.
I know this. laughter is medicine for the soul, and so we've certainly had it this morning, and it's been an interesting day, but we're excited, Ken.
Oh my
We've
goodness.
got with us the third man in the booth.
Oh my goodness.
The man, the myth, the legend. Jimmy Tony is in the house. Come on, somebody.
You know what I feel like today, Chris? I feel like it's like the Memorial golf tournament or the Masters or whatever.
Yeah.
And Jim Nance and Sir Nick Faldo have Jack Nicklaus sitting in the booth. And Jack's given his commentary. I kind of feel like there's this it's sort of that kind of a moment here.
It is. It feels that way, doesn't it? It feels that way. We're glad to have you, Pastor Jimmy Tony.
It's an honor to be here. If I was close enough, I'd kick both of you.
That's so wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, we appreciate that. Oh man, well
we'll get our kicks throughout the podcast.
Yeah.
Well, man, we're so excited to have you on with us today, and we're going to give people just a minute here to hit the share button, get the word out, let people know to jump on today, because this is going to be a tremendous conversation, and we're excited that you took a little time out, carved a little time out to be with us today, and let's get to it so we can, because there's a lot of things that I want to pick your brain on and ask you about today. So let's just go right at it. And one of the things that we talk a lot about around here is the power of our story. And you've got an amazing story about, your upbringing, where you come from, what God's done in your life. Why don't you just give us a little taste about your story?
Yeah, it's great to be with you guys. I appreciate all you do, and I appreciate this podcast, and I've enjoyed it many times in the past. So I count it an honor to be on with you, and appreciate our friendship beyond this. So thank you very much. I grew up in a little town in Louisiana called Leesville, Louisiana. Most everybody would know where Alexandria would be, so it would be 45 miles dead west of Alexandria. October 9, 1973, I'll be 50 years old this year. And so, but I was the I was the sixth child of our family. I've got three brothers and two sisters, and my mom and dad, my grandparents were in the church. We're an apostolic church, but my mom and dad were not going to church, and so we always would go to a Pentecostal church, and then something happened. My mom and dad even stopped doing that. And so I got invited to the United Pentecostal Church in Leesville, Louisiana when I was 10 years old to go be a visitor for my cousin in her Sunday school class. And I walked in that Sunday school class and just fell in love with it. Felt like an oasis for me. It felt like a safe place for me. And to my knowledge, I never missed another Sunday morning from that moment going forward. So I was about 10 years old. I got the Holy Ghost when I was 11 and almost 12, but got it when just a few weeks before I turned 12. My dad died when I was 13. That was a big curveball for me, and worked through that. Preached my first sermon when I was 12 years old in youth service, which could really call that a sermon. And then preached my first revival when I was 17 years old in a little place called Rose Pine, Louisiana.
Wow.
And then went to Bible college, and kind of the rest is history. So that's how I got into this.
So awesome.
That's on the call of God, let me just say this real quick. I have, I could tell you the day I got the Holy Ghost, the day I got baptized, the day I got engaged, the day I got married, the day my daughter was born. I can do all that. But I could never tell you a day that I felt a call to preach. I never had that moment. I never had that. Paul said that if you desire the office, you desire a good thing. And I think that's how I would sum up my calling, is it was never a, thou art called to preach.
Yeah.
Mine was just a desire. I just wanted to preach. And it was something about it that struck me. And so still to this day, I've never felt a call. And if you ever heard me preach, that probably makes sense now. You're like, oh, that makes sense. but it's always just been a desire that, hey, it's something I desire to do. And so I'm thankful for that.
Man, that's awesome. So 12 years old, you start preaching, whatever. Who in your life was somebody who kind of fostered that? Like, who was the influential? 'Cause it had to be somebody that was like cultivating something in you. I mean, obviously you had the desire, but somebody saw that potential and saw that desire and
Yeah, when I was 5 years old, sitting on the front row of a small church, I'd watch the pastor preach. His name was Malcolm Jean, and I'd watch him preach, and he would wrap his handkerchief around his microphone, and that's how he preached. So I would go home, get in the bathroom, take some toilet paper, wrap it around a hairbrush, and then I'd preach in the mirror, and I would
Wow.
basically mimic what I saw him do. Um, and then when I got the Holy Ghost, there were several people that became very instrumental in helping me, especially after my dad died. There's a layman in the church in Leesville, still alive today. His name is Lewis McGee. His family became an integral part of my life. They became my family. And then we had an assistant pastor in Leesville at that time named Brother David Tipton, which is now the superintendent of Mississippi. And Brother Tipton was just the the key motivating factor of probably keeping me on the right path and really investing much time and much energy. So, I would say a Lewis McGee and a David Tipton were extremely instrumental. There were many other men along the way, but they were extremely instrumental in helping me stay on path and keep my focus and foster that feeling of ministry.
You know what's interesting about that is when a lot of times when we talk about this topic, a lot of times people want to kind of like highlight like this is how I was called, and I think what's interesting is that when you think about it and you listen to your story, obviously somewhere along the way, at 12 years old and whatever, somebody said, you know what, let's have him do that again. And let's have him do that again. And eventually at 17. And it's interesting because Jesus said, by their fruit, you'll know them. Right. And so maybe it's interesting. Maybe it was something God put in you early on, and it was just sort of recognized and acknowledged by others, the fruit of the gift. Like it's apparent, it's obvious. There's fruit in that gift, and so they see that, they see the results of it, and to them it's like this guy's got it. God's gifted him to do this, and the telling manifestation of that was the fruit.
Man, that first church invited me to preach. Why that happened, only God knows. But it wasn't because I was a preacher. That first night was horrible. I didn't even have. I don't even know that I had 5 sermons, and I had 5 services staring at me. So I preached Wednesday night, came back Thursday and preached, and it was worse than Wednesday night. And came back Friday night and preached, and it was the first time that I felt that fire, that I felt that anointing. And it was like a lightning bolt, or sticking your hand in a light socket. And I was like, oh, there it is. And then that kind of became the fuel, like, okay, that's what we're going after, and that's what this is all about. So I'm glad I survived the Wednesday night, the Thursday night to get to the Friday night. But it put a fire in me, and I've been chasing it ever since.
And those first sermons, I remember my brother helped get me my first message. I was 17, preached in Coshocton, Ohio, and the 3 ladies on the front row, they were sleeping so hard, they were snoring like crazy. I mean, just snoring like crazy. But Brother White had something going on medically, and we prayed for him at the end of that service, and God touched him and healed him. And I'm like, man, that it just from the very get-go just reminded me that it's in spite of my preaching that God does what he does, and kind of sets that up. I want to kind of shift just a little bit, because I know church planning is a big part of your life and who you are, what you've given yourself to, and whatever. When did that start? Like when did that kind of get a hold of you? The idea and the concept of, you know, the mission, like the mission is what it's about. And my part in that is God's called me to be a church planner.
Yeah, the greatest decision outside of, just surrendering my whole life to the Lord that I think I probably ever made from a ministry standpoint was the decision to go to Bible college. And so I went to Texas Bible College, graduated high school in 92, enrolled in TBC in February of 93, and was sitting in a class, and Elder J.R. Enzi was teaching on the thought of pioneering a church. To my knowledge, that's the first I've ever heard of that. I may have heard of it before, but it's the first memory. And so I remember raising my hand in class and said, "What is pioneering a church?" I don't know what that means. That you would start a church. Well, I'm from Louisiana. There's a church on every corner. There's a decent sized church on every corner. So I just always thought I will take one of these churches on one of these corners because I didn't know there was any other way. And he said, "Well, pioneering church is starting a church." I said, "What do you mean starting a church?" He said, "Going into a city that has no church or is under church and planting a church." The moment he said that in that classroom, I knew, hey, that's what I'm going to do. I'm
Wow.
going to go start a church. I just didn't know where. And so I started thinking about it, praying about it. All right, where can I go? Where can I go? Where can I go? And then I was going to school with a girl that was from Nebraska. Her dad pastored a home missions church, invited me to come preach Easter. And so I was like, me preach Easter? My God, in Nebraska. I couldn't spell Nebraska, but I was like, I'll figure out how to get there. So I drove from Houston, Texas to Nebraska City, Nebraska, and preached Easter. And it was the first time that I really remember preaching in a church plant as well. It was me, the pastor, his wife, two daughters, so that's five people. And I think those same three ladies that was in Ohio, I think they may have came over.
They were special guests.
I think they may have came over for Easter that day because that's the only three. There was three other ladies in that service, and so there was eight of us. And I was a little taken back by that because it's Easter. I was expecting it to be packed, and so I preached. I loved it. I felt good about it. On Tuesday of that week, we went to Omaha, and I was standing on a sidewalk downtown Omaha, Nebraska, and felt the Lord. I've only heard this voice one other time in my life. And I felt the Lord tell me, not audibly, but as audibly as you can get for me, that, hey, this is where you're going to come back and plant a church. So I knew, boom, it's going to be Omaha. And so I
Wow.
graduated in 95, got married in 95, told my wife that we would move to Omaha one day and start a church. And we moved to Omaha, Nebraska in 1998, launched that church in 1999, and lived the next almost 12 years there. So, and so that was the initial beginning of my church planting journey.
So when you ended up in Omaha, and obviously based on what your story that you just told, there probably wasn't a whole lot of, I don't know, maybe influence to say this is how it's done. I mean, maybe there was. Maybe there's the gap between like when you heard that first at Bible college and but I mean, did you go there just like, all right, here we go? Or, I mean, what was that like?
I had more people try to talk me out of going there. Church planting is hard. Some of our family that was not in church would be like, have you done a survey? Do you even know if people want to be Pentecostal? Do you even know if anybody will come to your church? And there was all these weird questions. I was like, no, I just feel like that's where we ought to go start a church. And so we knew. Now I'm sure there were things out there, so this is not a mark that there was nothing there. But I was unaware of anything, and I had little if any connections anywhere. So we genuinely moved there with nothing, no one, didn't know anybody, and just launched a church.
So what did you do? What did you just showed up on site and just said,
Yeah,
like,
I
we're
did
gonna
thing you're not supposed to do. So
Did you just say, you know what, we're just going to pray until, or did you?
no, we printed some door hangers. I made some homemade door hangers that they looked. I thought they were nice, but looking back, they were a joke. And we just started. April the 18th was the day. That was, I think, the week after Easter that year. I didn't want to start on Easter, and so April the 18th, 1999 was our first service. And so February, March, first part of April, we started bombarding neighborhoods with these door hangers and asking people to come to church. And that's how we started. I have bought the most expensive sound system in church planting history, though. My sound system for my church plant was $900,000.
What?
Yes, I bought a $900,000 sound system.
Okay, now wait a minute. I know you're a smart guy. So there's
And I
gotta
know
be a
you're
backstory.
rich. I know you're rich.
Yes, yes,
You
yes.
and your father owns a cattle on 1,000 hills, but you're gonna have to explain that.
Okay, so what happened was when we moved there, we had no money. And so my wife's father had just passed away, and I think she had got $17,000. So we bought a very, very used single wide trailer, and we was able to pay cash for it. And so we lived in this trailer park. And then I had worked for Sherwin-Williams Paint Company, and I cashed in my 401k, which was about $14,000. By the time I paid my taxes and penalties, I got about 10,000, and that's what I used to buy a sound system, uh, everything you would need to launch your church. And I started thinking the other day, what would happen had I still had that Sherwin-Williams stock?
Mm.
And so if I'd have not added one nickel to it, and I'd have just kept the $14,000 invested and never added any more to it, today that would be $900,000 in retirement account.
Mm.
So my first sound system was $900,000, which I do not recommend. So I could have used that 900,000 today, and
Wow.
still had a sound system back then. So we just went and started, and the first service we had some people drive up, like family. Actually, this is kind of a unique twist. The guy that first told me about church planting was J.R. Enzi,
Hmm.
and him and his wife drove to Nebraska
Oh, wow.
in that first service, and they were in our very first service with us.
That's amazing.
Kind of shocking and
That's
nerve
funny.
wracking all at the same time.
It's funny that you mentioned that because when I went to Bible college, and I've told this story a lot. I was just at Michael Lindsay's church for a leadership deal a few weeks ago, and we were talking about, and I've shared this story, and their family knows it a lot, but I'd only been in church for really, months, really, when I went to Bible college. And I remember Brother Enzi asked me one day, he was the president at TBC when I was there. He said, how long have you been in church? And I said, well, like really in church, maybe 6 months. And he said, oh Lord. So he said, do you mind if I want to personally disciple you? And I remember him telling a story about, he was in home missions at that time. He was a part of the home missions, and that's when a lot of these guys from like Texas and Louisiana and whatever ended up in New England and the Northeast and in places, North Carolina,
Yeah.
right? Wayne Huntley and all these guys. There was this really big push, and he was in the middle of all of that. So that's pretty interesting. That I'm just thinking of the domino effect and sort of that chain of connection. That how things sometimes you don't see them working out, but there's something behind it.
Yeah, we had 21 that first service. Now, if you take away a few family members and the Enzies, I think we ended up with 14 Omaha people. And then the next week we had 11, and then the next week it was around those same numbers, and it just kept building. I'll never forget the very first time we had 37 people in church. Now,
Wow.
that does not sound like a big number, but when you're used to having 15 and 16 and 17, I mean, we only had set up about 25 chairs. And so I went to the restroom We're about 10 minutes from church. I went to the restroom, came back out, and all in all, there's people standing around. There's no chairs. And so we're having to set out chairs, and we had 37. Now, I
That's
didn't tell
awesome.
everybody we only had 20 chairs set up to begin with. I just told everybody, all my friends, hey, we have to set out chairs today. And
Right.
37 people, but it might as well have been 500 people.
That's so cool.
It was just a
How did you make connections? Like, how did you? I mean, you were like not from there. You had there was nobody in the community you knew, and probably once you start making some connections, and then they've got family, they've got friends, and you start working on that and building that up. But how? I mean, how
we
did
would
you?
go, we would do, try to do some outreach events, meet people there, but mainly we would just try to go see, go to a mall, go to a store, intentionally bump into people. We were in the Midwest. We're from the South. They say we have an accent. And so people would be like, hey, you're not from here. Where are you from? Exactly. I moved here to start a church. Why don't you come visit? Why don't you come? And so just little things like that. But, you know, uh, home Bible studies, personal evangelism, those type of things were big. It was just me and my wife. And so we just shouldered the responsibility. Probably the greatest thing that happened was uh, a young lady. She was 18 years old. She talked her parents into, instead of going to Bible college, if she could come to Omaha for 1 year and
Hmm.
help us. So she came. She had a great job, uh, and she was like rich to us, and she was young, but she fell in love with my daughter, and she was just kind of there for really my daughter, my family, whatever we needed. So when we would go teach a Bible study, she would watch Caitlin, and then
Wow.
she just became very instrumental in helping with music, teaching Sunday school. And really that was the first time that I had the thought, and it'd be a little better to start a church with a team
Interesting.
than it would be, even though that concept that wasn't even birthed yet. You pushed out of the airplane, you parachuted in, you and your wife, and you started a church. And so she came, and she was supposed to stay a year, and she stayed the whole time we stayed. And so she
Wow.
was
Wow.
there with us the whole time, and her husband became a vital part of our ministry, and now they pastor a church in Mississippi and doing a great job. And
Hmm.
That's
so,
amazing.
but just that one extra person that caught the vision really helped us. And I remember when, the first service that we break 100, the first service that we broke 200. The first time we broke 200, I was preaching out. I wasn't even there. And my wife called. She said, "You're not going to believe it." I was expecting some horrible story. She said, "We had 203 people today." So
Wow.
the church was just electric and on fire. And so it was nothing but great memories in Nebraska, and that's how
So
we
cool.
started it. Now, look, to be fair, we also fought all sorts of hell. You know what I mean? And
Sure.
even my marriage, our marriage was stretched to the limits.
Yeah.
We probably had some chinks in our armor that we didn't know was there, but church planning reveals all that. It doesn't
Sure.
fix any of that. And so we had some, here I am working a full time job, making minimal money, giving away most of the money to get this church off the ground. And I don't say any of that in a feel sorry for me mode. That's just what church planners do. When Abraham took Isaac up the mountain, everybody says he's going to sacrifice his son. But Abraham said, no, we're going to worship. And so what looks like sacrifice to some, to the one that's committed to it, it wasn't sacrifice to us, it was worship.
Hmm.
But yet it was still pulling and stretching my marriage, and even to the point where, we had to, like, okay, we got to go get some help. We got to, and so we go to professional counseling, and I hated that.
Hmm. They're asking the questions, probing questions.
Yes, and I am a smart aleck to the end. And yeah, yeah. Anyhow, and then we was like, well, maybe this isn't going to work, so let's find some preachers that would help us. And so we tried that, and that didn't go anywhere. And again, don't want to make it was J.R. Enzi. It was brother and sister Enzi that said, hey, come to our house. And they told he, if you know brother Enzi, he doesn't mind talking straight to you. And he talked straight, and he would punch me in the mouth. And quite frankly, his wife would do the exact same thing to my wife. And that's what both of us needed. We just
Yeah.
needed somebody to straighten us up, talk to us straight. And then we just made me and my wife just made up our mind. Let's fix this. Let's do this.
That's
And
so
so, but
good.
it was. And I'm not blaming church planning, but I'm just saying there was some pressure
Sure.
There's pressure.
there.
I
Big
think,
time.
you
Big
know,
time pressure.
I think some of the height, also the height of almost something that signifies the kind of sacrifice and just the stuff. Your story, you mentioned that you go to the mall and you'd go to the mall and you know whatever. Your story intersects with one of the most infamous early mall shootings, right?
Oh yeah. Back in Lord, my wife was. So when you start a church, you get in debt. That's just the truth.
Just expect that.
That's why you can't start a church already in debt
That's
because
why you didn't have the $900,000 today.
exactly right. That's exactly right.
That's why you're just a millionaire, not a multimillionaire
Well,
today, right?
they say the way if you want to become a millionaire through church planning, then start out as a billionaire.
That's
That's right. That's right.
very true.
So I started working a job again. We did the Dave Ramsey plan. I started working a job. My wife started working a job, and we were getting out of debt, and we were doing good. It was December 5th, 2007. And so what I'd do on my lunch break is I would run to the office, and I'd check messages, make sure everything's okay at the church, and then I'd go back, to my job. And while I'm a big Nebraska football fan, and we they had just hired a new coach, Bo Pelini, and I was listening to the sports talk show about that hire, and they came on and said, "Hey, there's a shooter at the mall in Omaha, Westroads Mall." Well, that sounded so strange. It's not like it is today. I mean, you're like, "Oh,
Right.
shooter." It's like a shooter. And so instead of getting on the interstate, I just said, "Well, I'm gonna go this way." So I immediately picked up the phone, tried to call my wife at her store. Nobody would answer. It just rang and rang and rang and rang. And I did not think anything about it. Just somebody in the parking lot with a gun. Then I see a couple of cop cars pass me. I was like, interesting. Then they come back on the radio and said there's actually a active shooter in Von Mar, which is a clothing store that my wife worked at.
Goodness.
So then I got real nervous. So I started calling the store again. Nobody answered. Called her cell phone, and then this thought went through my mind: don't call anymore, because if someone's hiding, just don't bring attention. She'll call you, when she can. So when I pulled up to the mall, it looked like a scene out of a movie. There were cops everywhere, uh, guns pointed at a building. I mean, it really looked like a movie scene. I saw some ladies coming out. They were crying, asked what's going on. They said there's a shooter in Von Mar. And I said, okay. They said he's shooting at customer service. Well, that's where my wife worked, at customer service. So I mean, everything's lining up to not look good. It was probably 20 degrees. It was freezing cold, and so we were just standing out there. People were there, family members standing there, and the time kept clicking, clicking, clicking. And finally, we heard word that the gunman had been shot, that he was dead. Didn't know if someone shot him. He shot himself. And still no word from my wife. Uh, this family member got a phone call. Their family had died in there. I'm standing there trying to minister to them, not knowing what's going on with this. Called my oldest brother, told my brother what's going on. I said, "Hey, it's been close to an hour now, and I haven't heard anything." I said, "So if I call you back, you're you know you'll have to call my mom and tell her that my wife got killed." And so another 20, 30 minutes go by, and I get this phone call from a number I don't recognize, and it's my wife's voice, and I answer it. And I could just immediately tell there was just terror on her. And I said, "Renee, are you okay?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Have you been shot?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Were you close?" She said, 3 feet.
God have
Jesus.
mercy.
Literally standing at a table, and it's like a 3 foot table. So she's standing on this side, and on the other side, her worker. When they said there's a shooter, when they realized there is a shooter, at first they thought the like decorations were falling, because you just never think this is a high end store, and so there's a shooter. They said everybody run, so they ran, and just because of where she was standing, She didn't have to go around that table. Everyone on this side of the table was shot. Everyone. The lady standing right in front of her was shot and killed. But she was just able to get in this room, go through these little double doors in this little warehouse. She's in the back with 14, 15 other ladies that's scared to death. And she told me later, she said, you would think there'd be a lot of panicking, screaming. She said it was eerily silent.
Mm.
We were just still. We were just waiting. Whoever opened that door, we knew. There's no lock. It's one of them flip those garage like doors. It's just warehouse doors. And a policeman told us later that was on the scene, the note he had left, he wanted to kill more than the guy just killed at Virginia Tech University. And so the policeman just believes that he never saw my wife go in that other room. Because had he done that, they said it was still almost 3 minutes before the cops got there, and he had 2 more rounds. So that's a long time.
Goodness gracious.
But for whatever reason, when he didn't see anyone else moving, that's when he killed himself right there at customer service instead of going back there. And so that was December the 5th, 2007, that she had to endure that. And then you hurt for everybody else, but yet you're thankful that
Sure.
you survived. But it was a unique story for our family. And I'll just say this: my wife got anything and everything she wanted for Christmas Day. And we were just one thankful family. And really, the kingdom of God, that's probably one of the first times that I was really exposed to how vast the kingdom is and how important it is to be connected to something. Because people started calling that I never even knew existed. And Paul Mooney called on behalf of the United Pentecostal Church. That was so weird to me. Wow. I mean, I was very thankful, but it was so surreal and like, who are we that you would do that? And so, yeah, we started in the mall and things got really crazy in the mall. But God was good at, hey, you know what? 1 year to the day, Brother Scott Graham invited us to St. Louis just to kind of get away. And it was at that place in Brother Graham's house that he prayed over my wife, and she had been having vivid dreams,
Sure.
nightmares. She saw dead bodies. She had blood on her shoes. She lost a lot of friends that day, and just the reality that it could have been you. But from that moment on that Brother Graham prayed for her until today, if and when she were to ever dream about it, and this may sound shallow, but it was never in color anymore. It was all black and white.
Wild.
And so it was never vivid anymore. And it was getting the healing process. I mean, it got to the point where my wife couldn't even be in a room by herself. She was scared. Just get up and walk in a closet, she'd be scared. And so the Lord just began to heal her and bring her through that.
My goodness.
And again, that was the kingdom. That was the church. That was the body ministering to the body. And
so good.
Something I'll never forget.
That's beautiful, man. That's amazing. That what year did that happen?
That was 2007.
2007. Did you, out of that, were there, I mean, obviously your wife being in the middle of all of that, did that give you an opportunity to minister and to?
Oh, yes. All of those families we were able to minister to help, to pray with, ongoing.
Yeah.
Gave us exposure in our community. We had, news at our church. We had newspapers, TV stations at our church. So it was and here's the unique, weird twist. The 18-year-old kid that did it had been to our church. Had been there several times. He had no idea that my wife was connected there. I mean, he was in the foster program. We had a lady in our church that took in foster kids. This was one that came through her place. So he had been to our youth service. He'd been to our Sunday service.
Wow.
Bro, I didn't know that. That's wild.
We had no idea of knowing that. He had no idea of knowing that. He was just a deranged young man.
Wow.
So,
goodness gracious.
Yeah, it gave us an opportunity in our community to kind of minister. But I'll tell you this, it also gave our church an opportunity to minister to us. And that was maybe the first time, because as a church planner, we're pouring ourselves into
Yes.
everybody.
Well, that's such a good point,
And
man.
when we got home that day, there were people from the church at our house waiting on us, just hugging on us, whatever we needed. And it really was a unique experience that now the church gets to minister to the minister. And so, yeah, it gave us an opportunity to minister, but more than
So
that, it
good.
gave the church an opportunity to be the church. And even
Man,
like when all that was going on, we called a lady in our church, and I told her, I said, go get Caitlin from school. Do not turn on a TV. Do not turn on a radio. Just go play with her. And so I called the school, told them what was going on. I said, I don't know what the deal is with my wife. Somebody's coming to get Caitlin. Just let her get out of class. And so, even people ministering to my kid at that time. And it allowed the church to mature. And we grew up fast that day.
Sure.
Chris, this might be a good opportunity to kind of to shift the conversation a little bit towards the idea of moving church people from consumer to producer, from member to
Yeah.
missional. I mean, it's the stuff that the stuff that happens. I mean, I think that might be a good segue into that.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And I think that's one of probably the biggest challenges of pastoring is to get the church out of that mindset and to empower them and mobilize them. Now, I think when you start a church, you create the culture. So you're kind
Sure.
of you can from the beginning say this is what we do. This is what is expected. But when you take a church, and I've taken two churches, and both of them older churches, and so like in Gainesville's a very preaching church. It's a very it's just a word church, and uh, it's a missions giving church in the sense of money. So when I got here, one of Brother Arnold's concerns was, hey, I don't want you to leave in 3 years because you got a niche to go start a church. And I get that, because once a church planner, really, you're always a
Sure.
church planner. And so I told him I understood that, but that if, my way to scratch that itch would be through daughter works and through planting churches. So I'm going to plant churches. I just can
That's
do it this
awesome.
way now. But we had to, at the very beginning, I knew that, hey, a, I can't come in a church that has a culture and just immediately change that culture. And so but from the beginning, I can start preaching things that are of value to me, and that is church planting. And so I just began, I mean, almost at the beginning, like first few sermons, and hey, we're going to plant churches. We're not going to plant any tomorrow, but we're going to plant a bunch of churches. And in 3 years, we're going to plant our first church. Because that's going to give me 3 years to preach it, talk about it, plant seeds, and get you off the pew and get you in the involved in the harvest. And so, like that church, like our church in Omaha that day, they just did it.
Yeah.
But now we started that church.
Yeah.
See,
That
that's
culture was totally different.
no, that's the
Where
thing I want to highlight, bro. It's interesting because you poured into them. So I just want to highlight something. I want you to continue that train of thought, but I just want to I don't know, just kind of hit you know, put a yellow highlighter on this. That it's so interesting that you're talking about that because when you planted the church, you showed them serve and sacrifice and whatever, and it just
Yeah.
took a moment or a situation to say, because that had been put in them. And so what you've seen me do, Paul told Timothy, you know, just as the things that have been committed from me to you, find other men, faithful men that you can commit these things to. And it's sort of this model. So it's interesting that it just took a moment in that church, in your church that you planted, for them to just sort of instinctively move into that mode of saying, we need to start doing what we've seen done. I mean, it was just modeled. And it's interesting because, like you said, it's different when you're in a different culture. And I'm not saying that the churches that you took or whatever didn't have a serving culture. I'm just simply saying that they see you sacrificing when you plant a church, and you move into those places, and then all of a sudden it's like the discipling cycle that Jesus basically told the disciples. Now, what I'm doing with you, you're going to do eventually. I'm just showing you how to do it until it's time for you to do it. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut in on you there.
It just takes, you plant the seed, but you need water. And so it took that event became the water. And all of a sudden, boom, here comes growth. And the same thing, there's been so many seeds planted in the church in Gainesville that it just needed some water. It just needed that, one man plants, one man waters, God gives the increase. Paul said, neither he that planteth or watereth is anything. So we're nothing. And once we get out of the equation, then God says, okay, now I can do great, great things. So, here, like same thing in Gainesville, it just needed water that, hey, this is in you. You can't have this much word in you and it not be in you.
Right.
You can't have this much missions mindset. So I wanted to shift the missions from, we always say you can't outgive God. Well, we only do that during sacrificial offering time, tithes and offering time, building fund time.
Right.
Can't outgive God. And God told me, he said, hey, if you can't outgive me with your money, you can't outgive me with your people.
100%.
So, if you can't outgive me with your purse, you can't outgive me with your people. And so I just started telling the church, we're gonna intentionally lose some people. We're gonna intentionally send people to go plant these churches. We're gonna send people with them because I've done it by myself. No one should have to do that. So let's figure out this team approach. Send that, and you can't outgive God. And so if you give sacrificially to the Lord and He blesses you, if you give your men to the Lord, He will bless you.
So true.
And we've seen that. And so here we are now. I've been here 6 years, planted our first church almost 3 years ago is when it got started. I took several couples with me to launch. We started putting thoughts and seeds in them. We are now 4 daughter works in. And we've got more people probably involved in ministry in the sense of soul ministry, not just serving around a building. I'm talking about reaching into the harvest.
Beautiful.
We have
that's so amazing.
More people involved. And you know what? It's amazing. Max Lucado wrote a book, and he said something like this: when fishermen don't fish, they fight. And it's amazing how much church drama disappears when people get involved in the harvest. And
That's so good.
And so it has been a great thing. Now it's again, you take a church that has a culture, and not that the culture is bad. Gainesville's, in my opinion, Gainesville's the greatest group of people I've ever met in my life. But they have a culture, and so to try to shift that culture, not that this culture is better, it's just this is my culture. This is my vision.
Sure.
This is what I want us to do. Do we still want to give to global missions? You better believe we do. But we also want to give to church planters. Do we want to send money? You better believe we do. But we also want to send people. So I'm excited about that.
Something that's interesting is sometimes you hear a lot, and I think it's well-meaning. I think people do it, make these kind of statements. I think they're well-meaning statements or whatever. And, a lot of times the mindset is if you want to keep people, you got to get them involved. And I think sometimes this is the way that churches that maybe don't have the kind of missional mindset that you've got, right? And we're not throwing shade. It's not, we're not hating on anybody here, but the mindset sometimes is, this might be how churches get, 17 departments and, because you're trying to just create more and more and more space under the steeple, institutionally, you're trying to create more and more space for somebody to be involved because the mindset is, well, we've got these people and people that have a hunger for God aren't going to be satisfied just sitting on a pew listening to sermons week after week. We've got to get them connected and we got to get them involved. And then sometimes you see these churches that are they're just so, I don't know, maybe top heavy with all of these departments and things, and probably good departments or things that are,
Sure.
But don't you think it's amazing when you begin to say, look, there's a vast world out there, and we do need to have good people that are working in these places. We do need to have good people that are helping with our students, and we do need to have good people in children's ministry and music and so on. But isn't it interesting, rather than just sort of building all of these ancillary departments in the church, isn't it powerful when you begin to say, God, we're going to sacrifice and we're going to do it for souls, and we're going to do it with a missional look, not getting people involved just so that we could get them involved and create more stuff here, but Lord, literally getting involved in reaching our world. I don't know. To me, this so far, I mean, a lot of great things you've said, but this is something that I'm taking a note on what you're saying today. This is going to be a takeaway for me. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yes, because sometimes we're not careful. We're creating this self-preservation culture. We're creating this Tower of Babel culture that, hey, we can just do it ourselves, and again, every preacher, every pastor would say, we want to pastor the biggest church we can pastor. I mean, I've never met anybody that said, I just want to pastor a small church.
Yeah.
I've never met anybody. The reality is, I don't know where my strengths stop. Like, I don't know where my limit is. I don't know if I can pastor 1,000 people. I don't know. I've never done it. I don't know, but I know I can plant churches, and I know I can do that. I know I can and grow a church, and I don't mean that in any arrogant or self-righteous way. I've done that, and so I'm leaning into what I know I can do. And so if I never have 1,000 people under the roof, that doesn't mean that I'm not responsible for thousands of people. When we did our remodel, we just remodeled our church, and there were a handful of people that they didn't understand why we would remodel if we didn't make bigger. And so I couldn't afford to make bigger right now. If we made bigger, then a lot of our missions giving stops. Our daughter works suffer, and I didn't want that. So I was like, but we need to remodel. We need to upgrade. We need to, the building's 25 years old. It hadn't been touched in 25 years. So we needed something. And so I told him, I said, you know what? Actually, we have increased our seating. We've added 100 seats in
That's
City.
it.
We've added 100 seats in Alachua. We've added 100 seats in Spanish. We've added 100.
Yeah.
So we've increased by 400 seats. And we got those daughter works aren't that size yet, but I'm saying we've got the capacity. And so we have increased that. And, so that was kind of a mindset shift. And so what I would do is anytime I would hear any little rumblings, I would just address it from the pulpit. Hey, this is what I'm hearing. And I respect that. I understand where you're coming from, and I can actually see why you would think that. But here's the other side. Here's what we're really trying to do. And so I just confronted it, and to me, and not in a, in a very loving, kind, understanding way, not in a throwing a fist down or gauntlet down type way. But now our church, it's so church planner driven.
That's so crazy.
That's awesome, man.
I just preached Josh Youngblood's 5-year anniversary for his church plant, and he calls me pastor, and so it wasn't even like I was away, because I was at a church plant, and that's just who we are, and that's what we do. And
that's so cool.
Hey, we are 6 years in now.
Yeah.
Our Christmas for Christ offering is the largest offering that we give. Our global missions giving has not decreased any, but yet our other giving has increased.
Wow.
So, we
full spectrum mission.
Yeah, everything is better. And so,
so good.
But we're able to fulfill what I have a passion for, which is church planting. And, and that's what I want Gainesville to continue to do. I want us to plant churches. I want us to come alongside other churches and try to help them as much as we can.
I love it.
I want to train preachers to not stay, but to go. And then I just want to continue to give to missions.
Hey, Chris, I know you want to move to another topic here, but I just want to. It's interesting that I just want to highlight this. There's a church planting movement, or not a church planting movement, but it was a group of guys. It was 3 guys that went to seminary together that I'm familiar with, that is in an urban area, and they wanted to be they didn't want to just be a multiplication church, but they wanted to be a church planting church. And they've planted in the first several years of them being there, like 13 congregations. And I was listening to a podcast, and he said all of our campuses run between 100 and 300. He said we actually don't have any building that seats more than 400 people. And he says, but we've got 13 congregations that are running between 100 and 300. And so he said if all 13 ran 300, he said we'd have almost 4,000 people. And he said, but because it's an urban area, they said there's no way that we could ever afford the piece of property and the size of building to seat 4,000 people. It just would be absolutely impossible. And then they made this statement. They said, actually, if we were all under one roof, I doubt that we would be to the number that we're at today. He said, now you come to any one of our churches and they just look like a larger medium-sized church, but all combined, we are easily a mega church.
To me, that is so healthy. And, I think the day of mega church is over.
Absolutely.
Totally agree.
That's come and gone. And that's not whatever. It is what it is. But I just don't think we can afford to build buildings like that. I don't think one more pandemic, we can't pay those buildings.
Sure.
And strap ourselves to mortgages,
Mm-hmm.
and then that we forget missions. And so that's.
So
I'll say this, and this is kind of a play on words, but the Dead Sea is dead because of the salt content. There's more salt than anything else, so it's dead. It's too much salt. If a fish were to accidentally swim in there, it's not going to survive because it's too much salt. Jesus said, "We are the salt of the earth." I don't know what the ratio is in a building, but I know this: when there's nothing but salt in a building, if a sinner were to swim in, most of the time they don't survive. Because
so good.
There's nothing but salt. And so we immediately expect. So what I'm trying to, and what I've been teaching Gainesville as if it was a church plant, is that we're expecting anyone and everyone to come in these doors. And we've got to have a place for anyone and everyone. And I am not a compromiser. I am not saying let's throw everything out. I'm not remotely saying that. But I'm saying we've got to have relationship with people. We've got to have good relationship with unchurched people long before they're ever going to be who we are. And so, again, I don't know what that ratio is, but, let's just say it's 50-50 for a minute. I think every good church ought to look like, here's half your church and they look like they're on their way to heaven, and here's the other half that looks like they couldn't even spell heaven. That's a good relationship there.
See, and you're not talking doctrine. You're just talking salt content.
I'm talking about souls outweighing saints.
So good.
And so when all you have is a church full of saints, they're going to fight, they're going to bicker, they're going to murmur.
Absolutely.
And so, but once you start getting some of these you start reducing that salt. So the best way, the only reason there was persecution in the book of Acts is because they didn't go.
Right.
God said, I told you to go. You're not going? Okay, I'm going to make you go. Here's persecution, go. Because he was dispersing the salt. Because it's, when you salt your food, you put a little bit on. You put too much, you ruin the food. So Jesus was saying, you go be salt, but let's spread out and go. Mm-hmm. And I think as churches, if we could just get to the point that I'm not trying to build a bigger church than Ken or Chris right now. Yeah. I'm just trying to do what I can do in Gainesville. And if that's 400 people, then we'll thank God for that. And we'll start as many churches as we can. And so, like I said, we're on our fourth one. The first one that we started is about to go autonomous. And so we're going to take a break from, we've done 4. We're taking a break to now invest time, money, energy in the ones we've started to make sure they're healthy. Probably take 2 years off. But when I say off, just redirect our attention toward those we've already started. And then say, all right, where are we going now? And I even would love to plant a church away from Florida.
Yeah.
I don't know what that looks like. I don't know all the dynamics, but I would love for there to be a daughter work of the Pentecostals of Gainesville in Denver, in New York, and I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, but after a while you saturate an area, but there's so many people out there that needs a church. So I want to do everything I can to spread the salt instead of just gather.
Let's
love
just
that,
let's
man.
just
I
really
love it.
break the paradigm and do it together. Let's just
For real.
let's just totally break the paradigm and be like, we're just going to do a
Why not?
3-part. Oh my
I have
goodness.
told people if they're just churches, and I'm not saying other churches aren't doing anything, but there are churches and there are districts that could plant churches all over these remote areas and fund them in ways that would never be funded. And look, you can give all the money in the world. You're never going to build a church without sacrifice. So we're not looking for somebody to pay our bills. So we don't have, if you're going to build a church, there's going to be sacrifice involved. And so, I see the wood, I see the fire, but where's the sacrifice? So somebody can give me all the wood, all the fire, but you're still going to have to give. You're going to have to sacrifice to build. But there are ways that we could start a movement where we would say, hey, that area needs a church. Okay, these 5 churches, these 6 churches are going to go in, and we're going to do that. You send a group one month, somebody else send a group. Every other month, we could have a group there.
Yes.
Doing evangelism, outreach.
Let's go.
Well, and I want to press in on something just real quick, and I know we're running out of time a little bit here, but just a couple things. Like Jeffrey Glick is on here, and I know he's out in the San Francisco area, and they're going through the whole building thing right now, looking for a place, which is almost literally, like it's literally impossible to find a building, and it's taken a miracle from God. They've got a great opportunity, so check out his information because that church has a great opportunity right now, I think, for a potential church building. But one of the things I think that hinders us, Jimmy, that I want to press in on, you talked about, and we're huge on this, that sending capacity over seating capacity, right? That's what the measurement should be, is sending. But this is why we're so passionate about discipleship and multiplication, because if we're going to send, there's got to be continuance of people within the body. Otherwise, you deplete all of your most valuable resources. People that have the mission, they're gone. Now you're left with people that don't have that mission. This is why, again, disciples making disciples that make disciples, and that multiplication is so critical, because if we're going to continue to reach, we've said, we launched a vision way back that we want to have 20 missions, whatever that looks like, by 2025. That's what our vision looks like. Well, we didn't know how it was all going to play out, but in order to get there, we had to have people that were making disciples here, so that then they could be sent out to go do those other places. So what are some things that you've done to help kind of keep that cycle going? So, what's the term you use, Ken? Sacrificial subtraction or something like that, where you kind of like, you release the people, but if there's not replenishment, now everybody becomes drained just a little bit.
Or if they don't have missional DNA.
DNA. That's the important piece.
I think one of the things, Jimmy, is there's somebody, a friend of ours, that talked about, too often what happens is that and I think this is something that really needs to be highlighted, because I do believe God rewards sacrifice, but there also has to be missional DNA, because the missional DNA creates missional overflow. In other words, the ability to reproduce will reproduce. And so I think this guy talked about the fact that sometimes what we do is we scoop up the anthill from the mother church. You scoop up the anthill and you move it to another spot, and you have another anthill over there, but because of the fact that it didn't have missional DNA, then really God will honor the sacrifice, and I believe He'll replenish, and I believe He'll bless, and all of those things. But I wonder sometimes if there's a little bit of reluctance. And I'm just gonna throw this to you, because you were the actual NAM big kahuna at one time. I wonder if there's a little bit of a reluctance sometimes for people to plant a church, because they've seen the picking up of the anthill, putting it in another location, and say both ended up struggling. And I think if there's not missional if there's not missional overflow that comes from a true missional DNA, I don't know. Maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah. Well, I don't see the value in planting a church somewhere else if there's not traction with new people.
Yeah.
The whole purpose of going into an area is to attract new people. If you're not attracting new people, let's bring those folks back home and let's start over.
So
I'm
good.
not for that.
So
But
good.
I do think there's a vast difference between church planting and church transplanting.
Woo,
And
come on
I
now.
think both
Well,
and I think both bring positive things to the table. So I'm not saying
Yes.
one is better than the other. I just think as a church planter, I can't look at a church transplanter and say I'm not doing what I should be doing because I don't have those numbers. But neither can a church transplanter look down on me for it's just two different worlds
yeah,
there.
sure.
And so one of the words I wrote down today was they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine. The key word there is continue. And if we're going to continue to plant churches, then I
Yes.
have to have new people in Gainesville. I have to have people discipling people. I have to have brand new people teaching Sunday schools. I can't send away the people and then not have my own church. And the reason I think there's a reluctance to do that is because it's work.
Yeah.
And I think there's a mindset that I'm 50 years old, I've got a good church, I should just show up and preach.
Hmm.
And I'm not wanting to build and rebuild and continue to be. Well, if if you're going to really plant churches, you're going to have to replenish the mother church, you
Yeah.
know. And
Yeah.
so that is outreach, that is discipleship, that is teaching home Bible studies, and
Man.
you know, and
Well, you said it, Jimmy. You said it. We believe it in money.
we just don't. Yeah, we don't believe in people.
We just don't believe it in people, and that's what hinders it. We encourage people, man. If you give, God's going to bless you, and He's going to give back to you. And I do think some of this, and I don't mean this to sound negative, but church culture in general. I'm just going to speak in general, and I know generalities are not true in every instance, but the reality is, for the most part, there's not the missional DNA in churches, and so sacrificing the best people leaves a deficit now because you don't have that replenishment taking place.
So, and and I don't want to lose good people. No,
Sure.
no good pastor does. But I also know how to go replenish people, so
Yeah.
I can go win somebody to the Lord. I just gotta, I gotta still want to fish a little bit. And so if I'm at
Right.
the point where I'm done, then I need to really kind of step out of the way and let someone else that's not done so we can continue to do this because we church has become just a business. We reach a certain number, we reach a certain income level. Let's just keep it at that and we can all be comfortable. I don't think God ever intended for church to be comfortable, and
Man,
so and again,
so
God
good, bro.
pick us up to do that. But I think and again, let me go back to this planting, transplanting thing. I think, don't believe everything you read on social media. We only put our highlight reels on social media.
Yeah.
There's a real life story going on behind the scenes. And sometimes we need to tell that story. Sometimes we need to put out there, church was horrible today. We had nobody. I
Yeah.
preached stupid. It was it. But there's too much ego in the ministry today. There's too much narcissism spirit in the ministry today. And so we gotta get all that down. Naaman, the Bible says he was great, he was notable, he was a man of valor, but he was a leper. In the same verse that describes all of his great qualities,
Mm-hmm.
it says he was also a leper.
Mm-hmm.
But most people believe that Naaman started out as just a certain man in 1 Kings 21. He was a certain man that pulled back his bow. He was just out doing, and God directed that bow and gave him a great victory, and that's what elevated him. And the problem is, God wants to use us
Yeah.
supernaturally, but most of us can't handle the elevation.
Mm.
We
So
can't
true,
handle
man.
success. And so, in the same verse that talks about Naaman's greatness, it also mentions his leprosy. And so, my question is, can God use us to do great things without it creating a little rising in my flesh called leprosy?
Mm.
Without me believing this. And so I think the best way to keep that leprosy of greatness off of your flesh is to continue to give.
Yeah, absolutely.
God instituted tithing for many reasons, one of which is to keep us from being greedy.
Sure.
And if you're watching this and you've been in church for any length of time and you're still just tithing, like you're missing it. That's the floor. That's
Right.
not the ceiling. And so it should be the beginning. But God gave us that so it would keep us humbled. It would keep us, you know, grounded. He could bless us with more. Now we give more. Same thing in the church. God
Yeah.
doesn't bless us with a big church so we can sit back, relax. Woe unto them that are at ease in Zion. He blesses us with more so we can give more, so we can do more. God never blesses us with more so we can do less. And
You know,
I think the same thing in church planning. We just got to continue to give more. Can God trust me with success?
one thing I want to, I was, so some might not know this, but all of us here have been church planters, all three of us. And I planted the church that I'm pastoring as well as some of our other campuses. And one of the things, and I was a NAM director in Ohio for 13 years, and so I had the ability to kind of work at a different level. One of the things that I think is interesting when we talk about some of this stuff, and this might be just a little nuance, but one thing that I think that you brought when you became the North American Missions Director for the United Pentecostal Church was that it never stopped being, and I know this sounds weird, but church planting never stopped being missional for you. You never stopped communicating the idea that it needs to be missional and that it's organic. In other words, I think the roots of your time in Nebraska or even this mindset and mentality, like you were just talking about in Gainesville. Like, we got to get the salt out of the salt shaker. We got to get this concentration of salt. Why? Because there's lost people out there. It wasn't like, well, I'm serving in this role now. And so the institution of the United Pentecostal Church, or this there's a departmental expectation that we got to come up with these great strategies to, well, we want 20% new churches by, I mean, those are all good goals or whatever. I'm not, but it never stopped being. I don't care what the institution perspective is. We want X number of churches in X many years. I don't know. For you, it always just sort of continued to feel like there's lost souls out there, for crying out loud. There's communities around us that don't have churches. I don't know. I just think that that's the thing that sometimes when we think about, planting churches and stuff like that is sometimes it feels like, well, we need to get a church there, we need to get a church there, and we need to get a church there. Well, no, it's not about we need to get a church there. There's lost people there, that there's no apostolic witness, there's no incarnational presence of the church in that area. And so I just want to say today, in this podcast, those that have listened, I want you to hear that heart. I want you to hear the heart that says, because we need to reach people, because of Calvary, because of the blood Jesus shed, because he incarnated himself and died on a cross, because he wasn't willing that any should perish. That's the heartbeat of doing the mission, reaching souls, planting churches. If that's not the nucleus, then it all really sort of falls flat, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And you can have a church, but if you don't have, we're not looking for a building. All Sodom and Gomorrah needed was 10 righteous people. Just think about that. Just 10 righteous people, and they could have overcome the spirit of homosexuality, every spirit that we're fighting today. God said, I don't need a mega church. I just need a storefront with 10 people. Just
Wow.
10 righteous people. And, again, we've got to get away from these numbers and these numbers of just trying to have a church in a city. We got to get people, we got to get a shepherd that has a burden for the lost to get into these places. And, and sometimes that takes a little nudge. The guy that started our church in Lake City, our first daughter work, I went to him and said, Brother Haney, have you ever thought about planting a church? Never. I can't do it. Yes, you can. There's a church planter. Well, what do you mean? Well, let's go to lunch. Let's go spend a week together. Have you ever thought about this city? Well, no, I've never. Well, that city needs a church. I want you to pray about it. But we gotta have the right person there. We're not just trying to go get a storefront. We gotta have the
Yeah.
people. And so when you get the right person with the right message at the right place at the right time, Josh Youngblood again, I'll mention him because he said this Sunday. He said, when I first met Brother Tony, he's the one who told me, "Hey, you're a church planter." And he said, I told him I'm not a church planter. And he said, here I am celebrating 5 years as a church planter. So we've got to, even as leaders, we've got to be able to see things in people. Just like at the beginning of the thing, we talked about Brother Tipton or Brother McGee that saw something in me.
Sure.
Now, they don't know what it was necessarily. There was just like God's hand is on him. We've got to find these people in our churches that we know God's hand is upon. And we've got to quit being hoarders and keeping them for ourselves. I'm glad my church didn't keep me for themselves. I'm glad somebody released me to go. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And I look, if my daughter and son-in-law walked in here right now and said that they were wanting to plant a church somewhere, that I would hate to see them go, but that'd be the greatest joy in the whole world,
Yeah.
Because that's what we're doing, and you can't outgive God.
Yes.
Every one of us has a credit score. We can do things to make that credit score better, make it worse. Every preacher has a credibility score. We do things to make that credibility good or make it bad. I want to do everything I can to be credible. I don't want anyone to ever say, Jimmy Tony is just after this, or he's just after money, or he's just after, no. I want, at the end of the day, when I'm dead, I'm going to preach my own funeral. I've already got it recorded because I'm going to make sure some good stuff gets said. But if somebody else were to say something, I want them to say the man was about the mission. And it was always awesome.
Beautiful.
I promise you, I don't go through a city where I don't think, I wonder if I could plant a church. I've called on storefronts of places I don't even live, just wondering what that would cost if I wanted to put a church in that building. So it's always there. And I implore any other pastor, no one's getting on to you, but I'm just imploring, if you could change your thinking. Mm-hmm. We're racing the rapture, man.
So
yeah.
True.
We do not need, does it really matter if Ken or Chris pastors 3,000 people and I pastor 300? What would happen if we all got together and just reached the world? And so
Absolutely.
and look, at the end of the day, that may be all I can pastor. Well, I can only do what I can do. And so if I'm trying to be like you, I'm gonna have burnout because I'm doing things that I was not wired to do. I cannot dunk a basketball goal. So if you lower that standard so I can finally dunk, we really haven't helped me.
Yeah.
Just let me stay on what I can do. And
so true.
If I can just pastor this, but I promise you, every pastor that's pastoring 100 people, I promise you, there's somebody in their church that could go down to another community and pastor 100 people.
And even if I was pastoring 3,000 people, and I know this statistic, that there are 300,000 people in a 10-mile radius of my church.
What are you doing there? Yes.
I mean, for crying out loud.
Right. The measurement is not how many gather on a Sunday, but how much lostness remains. That mindset is absolutely transformational. If we could shift everything that we do from how many people are in attendance to how many people are still lost, it would change the way we do.
Very true.
And we've got to get back to where one is not a bad number. Me and my wife's going to go here in a couple of hours, and we're going to teach a Bible study to a 91-year-old lady. 91 years old.
Come on now.
And then we're going to go teach another Bible study to a brand new couple that just started coming to church, that's living together, that's nowhere near where they need to be with God. That's how the kingdom is advanced.
That's, by the way, that's what I was talking about, missional DNA. That, bro, and I know those of you that have listened to this podcast right now know if you've listened for this whole time, you can feel the humility, you can sense the humility in this pastor. I'm telling you, folks, this right here that we're talking about that's the missional DNA we're talking about.
That's it.
That's what we're talking about when we say don't just scoop up the anthill and put it in another place and celebrate and say woohoo, we got a church there. We're talking about does it have the capacity to reach? And it starts when that missional DNA is put in that mother church. Isn't that right, Chris?
So good, man. That's so awesome. Well, man, I know we've gone a little long today, but so much good stuff.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey Glick commented, it's been rich today. There's no doubt about that. It certainly has been rich. My brother mentioned in just a chat that, you kind of talked about seeing that church planter in somebody else. There's a great book by Dave Ferguson called Hero Maker, the ICNU model. And I think we've got to get back to that of seeing what's inside of that next generation. Inside of David, there was a king, but somebody had to anoint that and pull that out of him and whatever. But man, so much good stuff today, Jimmy. We really appreciate you carving out. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for being here. Well, man, we certainly appreciate you and appreciate this time together. And I would encourage people, man, share this on social media, get the word out, because we have, like you said, we're racing the rapture. We've got a tremendous work that's ahead of us, but I believe that in these last days, God's going to do the work and raise up missionaries and church planters all over. So we appreciate everybody being on today. Appreciate all the great comments and just being a part of this. We look forward to coming back to you next Tuesday around 10 o'clock in the morning. Until then, go live mobilized.